What's good? What's good? It is extremely unfortunate that I have to make this disclaimer before the video, but I'm going to make a disclaimer. Talking about cultural Marxism is not an alt right thing. It's not a neo Nazi thing. It's not a fascist thing. It's not an anti Semitic thing. It is a common civil discourse talking point that we should be discussing. I am a big ass hippie. My dream for society is a world where people feel safe to go drop acid in the woods and reconnect with nature and community. All types of people, because that's one of the best ways I believe you can pursue self actualization in moderation, mind you, in moderation. Uh, so now let's get to the topic of the video. Actually, no, one more point. You know what's funny? Karl Marx was actually really, really anti Semitic. So, like, people who are criticizing Karl Marx, his ideology in communism, also probably, dislike the fact that he's an anti Semite. And so, that tactic, that whole misdirection tactic, is a common tactic of the left. They are a very duplicitous bunch. That's another one of those obscure words I like. Duplicitous means just like shady or dishonest, something like that. They're not honest. They, okay, so let's get to this video. If you're not familiar with the name, let me just actually, I'm going to read a little article. This is not something I normally do, but I've been doing some reading and I want to share with you. Do, do, do. I actually disagree with this first sentence here. You can see my screen, you can read along. There's little debate that modern day American universities, public education, mainstream media, Hollywood, and political advocacy groups are dominated by leftists. This is no accident, but part of a deliberate strategy to pave the way for communist revolution developed more than 80 or 8 decades ago by an Italian political theorist named Antonio Gramsci. So I disagree with part of this. I disagree with the first sentence. There's little debate that modern day Americans, so there's a lot of debate about this point. I agree that our institutions have essentially fallen. So like their plan is quite effectively working, but there's still uh, it's working because people are debating about what the heck is going on in our country. Described as one of the world's most important and influential Marxist theorists since Marx himself, if you are not familiar with Gramsci, you should be. The Italian communist is credited with the blueprint that has served as the foundation for the cultural Marxist movement in modern America. So he was actually kind of the person who coined the term cultural Marxism or brought the idea to the forefront. It was not Hitler. It was like Gramsci in the 30s. Yeah, okay. There we go. Later dubbed um, by 1960s German student activist Rudi Dutschke. I don't. I apologize if I mispronounced that. As the Long March Through the Institutions, Gramsci wrote in the 1930s of a war of position for socialists and communists to subvert Western culture from the inside in an attempt to compel it to redefine itself. Redefine itself. Gramsci used war metaphors to distinguish between political war of position, which he compared to trench warfare, and the war of movement or maneuver, which would be a sudden full frontal assault resulting in complete social upheaval. And so I think that they've been very effective at infiltrating the institutions and subverting them, and we're seeing it. And the polarity that I always talk about, this tension between the left and the right, um, is a direct result of these efforts. It's intentional. The division is intentional. Uh, the rest is kind of boring stuff. Maybe we'll read some more, but I don't know. Let's just. Here's some more. In Western societies, by contrast, Gramsci observed that the state is only our outer ditch, behind which lies a robust and sturdy civil society. Gramsci believed that the conditions in, oh, that's just basic history stuff again. He's talking about, oh shit, I don't want to read all of this, but I'll link the article in the description. I don't know about this website. Um, so call me an alt-right person or whatever. But just discussing the facts here, I don't see a lot of, I see a little exaggeration and a little bias, but um, his advocacy of a war of position instead of a war of movement was not a rebuke of revolution itself, just a differing tactic. A tactic that required the infiltration of influential organizations that make up civil society. Gramsci likened these organizations to the trenches, in which the war of position would need to be fought. The massive structures of the modern democracies, both as state organizations and as complexes of associations in civil society, constitute, for the art of politics, as it were, the trenches, and the permanent fortifications of the front in the war of position. They render merely partial the element of maneuver which before used the whole of war, etc. So that was a quote from Gramsci. Gramsci argued that a frontal attack on established institutions like governments in Western societies may face significant resistance and thus need greater preparation, with the main groundwork being the development of a collective will among the people and a takeover of leadership among civil society and key political positions. And here's my own personal thought. Something that the and here the leftists, the communists, the socialists, the Fabianists, whatever you want to call them, these people, like they all have the Trotskyites, the Marxists, like the collectivists, all the authoritarians that kind of overlap with one another. In my last video, I talked about the future political fight is not between liberals and conservative, it's between authoritarians and libertarians. So all those left authoritarian ideologies, we can throw fascism in there too, a right authoritarian. Okay, anyways, um I kind of totally just forgot my thought. Oh my god. This is hilarious and embarrassing. I was listing off all the different names. See, that's what's frustrating, is that we get so hung up on these names and these definitions when um fuck. This is why it would be so good to have like actual conversations with people, because back and forths are so much better for me. I actually don't really like doing these videos. I do them to do them, but I would much rather have actual conversations with people. I was making a point and I can't go back and rewind, or I can actually. Wait, no, I'm just going to keep going. Okay. Okay. I remembered it. God damn it. One thing that these leftist groups do a lot better than libertarians is generational thinking. Generational thinking. These people know that in their lifetime, they likely will not see the fruits of their labors, but they're still invested. That's how ideological these people are. Whereas libertarians, who are also very ideological, don't really think about future generations in terms of how to impact society, politics, culture, because they just usually want to be left alone. And so that's kind of how these leftists can gain momentum and traction. And also, the right is, uh, I hesitate to say tolerant, but I would say they're tolerant. They've been a lot more tolerant than uh well, let's be real, than like Middle Eastern Islamic countries, because you don't see that pride crap in Middle Eastern countries. Like it's a meme, but it's true. During Pride Month, none of the major corporations in the Middle East change their logos. It's a meme, but it's true. So I don't necessarily, I laugh, but that's how I cope. But I don't really relish like pointing these things out. So relative to other countries, conservative Christians in America have been a lot more tolerant. However, they are getting fed up, and ah, I really just, I really would like to try and mitigate violence. I would. But unfortunately, leftists are insane. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it, because they do shit like this. They think like so maniacally, like trying to just literally take over the fucking world. Now I'm talking about like Klaus Schwab, which, and here's where it gets like even further complicated. This is a great segue. Someone like Klaus Schwab, who isn't even maybe at the top of like the elites, right? He's just one of the faces, but they have to have public faces. But we know there's private people as well. I don't think he's actually ideologically a leftist. I don't. I think his desire to pursue power pushed him down the most likely path for him to obtain power. And he doesn't care about ideology. He cares about power, just like an evil hole that cannot be filled within him, that he's trying to just stuff with power. And that's like what all these other elites are doing. Oh man, it's like, I'm not a Christian, but damn, there is evil in the world. And so there's a level above the leftist ideologues, like the bankers and the ruling class, that they don't actually give a shit about socialism or communism. They don't fucking care. They just care about power and resources. And all you woke people are just going with the current thing, supporting authoritarianism. And it's so, so depressing to see. And it's depressing knowing that like violence is potentially on the horizon. Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm starting to go down a dark hole. Okay. Gramsci argued that a war of position is necessary for advanced capitalist societies where civil society has become a very complex structure that is resistant to incursions such as economic depressions that would otherwise weaken the current power structure in terms of ideological support. In other words, civil society provided a support system for the current political structure and those in power who could help it withstand otherwise negative shocks like economic recessions. I agree. Oh my gosh, did I just say I agree with a leftist on something? I did, because I can be open minded and try to see someone's argument. I agree with this analysis. Um, Minus this part, if you're watching, if you're actually watching, I'll try to highlight. So a position is necessary for advanced capitalist societies. I don't believe America is a capitalist society. And that is a whole conversation I'm wanting desperately to have with someone. America's fascist. So, like, in all my videos, I say, you damn Antifa people. I kind of agree with you, but like, burning buildings is not the answer. Um, and so, okay. Gramsci believed that in advanced capitalistic Western societies, the prevailing ideological support system for a capitalist economic structure and bourgeois values would shield the current ruling class from any organized opposition. See, but I agree, but it's not advanced capitalistic Western societies because we're not capitalistic. We are very, very far from it. We do have a ruling class. We do. I agree. And the structures in place keep them in place, and they continue to build more and more structures to keep them in place. I agree. I agree, Gramsci. Sorry. Um but communism is not the answer. That's where I disagree. Oh my gosh. It's just like you're so right and so wrong. As a result, he believed essential to study in depth which elements of civil society correspond to the defensive systems in a war of position. I don't have any idea how long this is. I don't know. Nobody's going to watch this. Don't manifest bad things, manifest good things. People are going to watch this. Gramsci defined civil society as the ensemble of organisms commonly called private. I kind of like that. More directly, he described civil society as that sphere of social activities and institutions not directly part of the government. Primary examples included political parties, that's okay, trade unions, church organizations, and other popular voluntary associations. Gramsci noted that dominant social groups in civil society organized consent and hegemony. They assumed a leadership position by consent of members. Their leadership role includes fostering an ideological consensus among their members. Gramsci envisioned that these groups would organize their opposition to the existing social order. Gramsci, however, viewed civil society and Western societies to be a strong defensive system for the current state, which in turn existed to protect the interest of the capitalist class. But let's not say capitalist class. Let's say ruling class. Ruling class. And we agree. Change one word and we agree. Jiminy crickets. And that's the thing. Nobody, like, in modern times, nobody can define capitalism. They all freaking say it's evil, but they can't define it. Okay. Sorry. This is both fun and depressing at the same time. In the West, there was a proper relation between state and civil society. And when the state trembled, a sturdy structure of civil society was at once revealed. The state was only an outer ditch behind which there stood a powerful system of fortresses and earthworks, he wrote. In short, in times when the state itself may have shown weakness to overthrow from opposing ideological forces, the institutions of civil society provided political reinforcement for the existing order. You know what that makes me think of? That makes me think of The Hunter Biden laptop story being suppressed before the election, like coordination from the state and our journalists in the tech industry to suppress extremely relevant information before an election. So tell me how America is capitalist, or tell me how him and I disagree, because what he just described is what's going on right now. So I agree. I agree. Again, Gramsci. I actually, yep, okay. In his view, a new collective will is required to advance this war of position for the revolution. To him, it is vital to evaluate what can stand in the way of this will, i.e., certain influential social groups with the prevailing capitalist ideologies that could impede this progress. Again, not with the capitalist stuff. Oh, I'm open to like a new word. If we can find a new word that encompasses freedom, like freedom that encompasses the protection of property rights, that starts with your body, like that's the fundamental starting place. If your body doesn't belong to you, like what is the point of existence? Oh man, now I want to talk about slavery. And then we have to talk about the sound of freedom and how there's more slaves alive today than there were during when slavery was illegal. So it's like they just don't want you to talk about that. Okay, let's focus on the article. I'm sorry. Gramsci spoke of organizations including churches, charities, the media, schools, universities, and economic corporate power as organizations that needed to be invaded by socialist thinkers. And they use words like invaded and infiltrate, and they are I used the word duplicitous earlier, and that's why it's like these people, they're evil people, which is why they're so hard to deal with and interact with. They lack authenticity, they lack integrity. That's man, there's just it's an awful ideology filled with awful people. I'm sorry, I'm being toxic right now, and I acknowledge that. um I have internal fear around things being taken from me, which it drives my fear of communism, but that's because that's what communism does. Um, and so when I get my fear triggers, I want to be like aggressive, and I'm working on being less aggressive when my fear triggers come up. But I know how evil communism is, and you can too if you want to look into it. But it will take everything from you. I'm healing my trauma, bitches. Okay. Sorry. The new dictatorship of the proletariat in the West, according to Gramsci, could only arise out of an active consensus of the working masses, led by those critical civil society organizations generating an ideological hegemony. That's cultural Marxism. As Gramsci described it, hegemony means cultural, moral, and ideological leadership over allied and subordinate groups. The intellectuals, once ensconced, should attain leadership roles over these groups' members by consent. They would achieve direction over the movement by persuasion rather than domination or coercion. That is cultural Marxism. That is cultural Marxism. That was not Hitler. That was Gramsci. If I remember, I'll link another video I made. It was titled something like The Cult That Cried Wolf. because that is what the left has become. They scream bigot, phobe, Nazi, all the slurs, racist, sexist, um, you're a horrible person, like everything is evil to them, and they like label it that way. It's so I'm playing off the girl who cried wolf, the boy who cried wolf. It's they've lost credibility, and so now, unfortunately, like I do think there's a real rise in we can call it rightist extremism, um, but it's just a reaction to the leftist crap, and both sides are being manipulated by the social engineers. And I wish more people would like think about that. Okay, I'm gonna read that again, and I think we'll almost be done. I'd be shocked if anyone actually watches all of this. I will give you $3.73 if you actually watched this, and you in the comments just say 373. Not you, Kyle. I'm not going to give you 373. The new dictatorship. They use the word dictatorship. Like, this is the language that they use. This is the language that they use. The new dictatorship of the proletariat in the West, according to Gramsci, could only arise out of an active consensus of the working masses, led by those critical civil society organizations generating an ideological hegemony. I misinterpreted this sentence. Gramsci didn't use the word dictatorship. That's the author interpreting. So I apologize. As Gramsci described it, hegemony means cultural, moral, and ideological leadership over allied and subordinate groups. The intellectuals, once ensconced, should attain leadership roles over these groups, members by consent. They would achieve direction over the movement by persuasion rather than domination or coercion. The goal of the war of position is to shape a new collective will of the masses in order to weaken the defenses that civil society provides to the current capitalist state. Gramsci further emphasized the role of a political party to assume leadership and philosophical direction of all these civil society alliances. Additionally, and critically, one of the main goals of the party would be to place foot soldiers in the Revolutionary War of Position in actual state institutions, as well as such as legal institutions, police, councils, and influential bureaucracies. There needs to be established a foundation of socialists upon which to run the apparatus of the state once its overthrow was complete, Gramsci argued. As Gramsci described it, a war of position involves a passive revolution of sorts, transitioning from the dominant bourgeois order to one of socialism without any violent social upheaval. That's already been lost because we've already seen violence. Antifa. Okay, for social transition to occur, the necessary conditions in society must have already been incubated, according to Gramsci. Here he is referring to a new collective will among the masses that coincides with having the right people in strategic positions among civil society and state bureaucracies. God, I fucking hate bureaucracies. Not just because it's a really hard word to spell, but the actual administrative nightmare that is known as bureaucracy. I hate that. but it's also just really hard to spell. Gramsci pointed to the example of the Italian fascism of his time as an example of passive revolution. As he noted, economic fascism consists in the fact that the economic structure is transformed in a reformist way from an individualistic to a planned command economy. This intermediate economy could serve as the starting point for the next transition to total state control of the means of production, a transition that could occur without radical and destructive cataclysms of an exterminating kind. So I make the joke, what's the difference between communism and fascism? One uses sunshine and rainbows, and the other uses nationalism or patriotism to create a state sponsored hell. They literally, like fascism, they're open and they're upfront about the fact that they want like the state to be in control. Um, Communism, they're not open about it. It's like the dirty secret they don't want to talk about because they're dishonest people, as per my earlier comments, my earlier toxic comments. But is it toxic if it's true? Communism and fascism are both bureaucratic, administrative nightmares, genocidal nightmares, both of them. Economic fascism takes a step toward collectivism of the means of production without seizing them from the capitalists. What's the fucking. Sorry. Okay. Fascism serves to accentuate the plan of production element of the economic structure, making it easier to transition to complete collectivization. The shift helped to facilitate widespread acceptance of the notion of greater centralized control over production without actually wrestling control over the means of excuse me. Does that wrestling? There might, anyways, wrestling over the means of control. God damn it. I'm going to restart. I'm sorry. Without actually wrestling control over the means of production from the capitalists or eliminating profit yet. I made a video about why profit is not inherently bad. I'll try to link that one too, if I can remember. I got to link it a few. Once all these conditions are in place, i.e., a new collective will, ideological control over institutions of civil society, revolutionaries in strategic positions in the state, the time would be right for the final and conclusive war of movement. This full frontal war of movement to overthrow the existing state and social order will be assured to not only be successful, but also permanent. For according to Gramsci, in politics, the war of position, once won, is decisive, definitively, excuse me. The left's long march through the institutions is a deliberate attempt to create conditions right for the final overthrow of our private property society. Their success would spell disaster. Overall, I agree with that article. I liked it a lot. Thank you. Let me see if I can think of some ending notes. It's not anti-Semitic to talk about this. In fact, Karl Marx is very, very anti-Semitic, and he's dropped more N bombs than Joe Rogan, because apparently Joe Rogan got in trouble. I don't know. God damn it! I just mentioned him. Now I am all right. Whatever. I love you guys.